four, five relevant things that, um, you know, which is going on in the world at large, purely from an economic perspective. I know each of us have had on WhatsApp groups, we've had the circulations of the BCG report, the JP Morgan report, the McKinsey report, IMF predicting what it is, and so on. And then, of course, I recently heard about Reliance Retail India head, who actually sounded very optimistic. But I think between the optimism and the doomsday predictions, there is a middle path of absolute pragmatism. And could you, therefore, in your experience from the conversations that you've been having with global teams, India teams, just give us a sense of that perspective? Now, I do understand that corporates, functioning is different, but and non-profits are looking at it differently. Some of the problems are very unique to these two sectors, but there is also an intersection of that. And somewhere there is a cascading effect on what is happening in the for-profit world with the non-profit world. So, and I don't want it to just largely be just only around the pipeline of capital, CSR capital, which may be reduced, because I think that has been drilled and we've spoken about it so much at length across forums, across webinars. So on that note, over to you, Sridhar.
Sure. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Vijay, for the detailed introduction, and good morning and a warm welcome to all the participants. I presume in the first segment, we probably would be a little macro from our approach point of view before we get into a slightly micro kind of an approach. Now, we cannot talk about our current economic situation without linking it to the social context. And when I mean social context, I'm talking of the COVID and the necessitated lockdown that has happened. So the lockdown, which was more critical from a COVID point of view, has resulted in a slowdown in economic activity. So that is direct correlation. Now, globally and across different parts of the world, countries have acted very differently. There is a saying that in the US, the country compromised human lives to give precedence to economic activity. And has India done exactly the opposite? Probably yes. India's foremost concern was health and safety of the citizens of the country. And that is how I think the country acted quite early in times to ensure that a lockdown is enforced. Yes, this did cause a lot of pain from an economic point of view, which we will come to now. So the question is whether this was the right thing to do or wrong. I don't know whether we would have the right answer ever. Because if you see across the world, even though some countries did institute some kind of a lockdown, they were in a hurry to again pull back and free up economic activity. So the balance between the social context and the economic context has been dealt with very differently in different countries. Coming to India, if we look at the rate at which the virus has hit us, and if we look at today's number, which is about 20,000 cases for our kind of population, probably one may take a view that the lockdown was a very necessary step, and one may probably say it has been effective till now. The fatality has also been not as crazy as it has been across the world, and many parts of the world actually. So if we now assume that lockdown is a part of our life, at least as of now till May 3rd, and we don't know the future scenario, because this is really a black swan event, which is high unpredictability, weird consequences, sometimes dire consequences. So one can look at a couple of scenarios as to what could happen. In my view, optimistic scenario, I start with the optimism and then the pessimism follows. The optimistic scenario here, again, I'm classifying it into two. The very optimistic scenario to me looks like we find a vaccine very soon, number one. Number two, we're able to make it freely available across the globe, which is a very, very serious assumption. So to me, this scenario looks a little far-fetched at this point in time. So I go to the not so very optimistic. I'm not calling it a pessimistic scenario, but not so very optimistic scenario is that for the foreseeable future, we don't have a vaccine. And the only other way then to protect human life and human health is to ensure social distancing, sanitization, so on and so forth, with or without a lockdown. So the more optimistic scenario, according to me, is that lockdown gets lifted, economic activity resumes in a paced manner, because we have seen that resumption of economic activity in a knee-jerk manner can be really dire, and that's what happened in Mumbai in the last couple of days. The relaxations which were given effective April 20th were withdrawn yesterday for the city of Mumbai and Pune. So it means that economic activity or normal life, as people would call it, may not resume in the next few days. So if the lockdown gets lifted on May 3rd, there will be slow resumption of economic activity. Whether it's in the manufacturing sector, laborers have to move back, factory occupants or factory managers have to ensure appropriate protocols in social distancing. The service industry has to ensure that whether it is in the call center business or whether it's in the IT business, that we cannot have the kind of offices that we used to have where, it's like each one sitting on a bumper to bumper kind of a situation. So similarly, airlines have started looking at how flights can be configured, how aircrafts can be configured. So all this is not going to happen over a few days. It's probably going to take a few weeks. So what are we saying then? We are looking at a scenario that even in the optimistic scenario that the virus does not really spread, and the key is community transmission, and that's what we have successfully managed till now. And assuming that there is no further community transmission, there are expansion of isolated cases. There are predictions that the way things are going, we may peak somewhere in May, and then the flattening may start, which will probably go on. So note one thing, that because we may not have a vaccine in sight in the near future, the virus is not going to vanish from our lives after a lockdown lifting or whatever. So it is going to be part of our day-to-day life, and hence every constituent of society would want to ensure necessary protocols, necessary precautions. Now, this also is going to have a significant impact on the economy. So if we look at financial year 2021, Q1 is almost a washout if you really look at it. And if we go by the current predictions, Q2 onwards, economic activity could resume in a limited manner, and Q3, which is also coincides with the festival season, could be probably the real resumption of economic activity, but in a new world, in a world where sanitization, health, safety, social distancing, everything would be a way of life. So we are, whether you like it or not, we are all going to be forced into a new normal. A new normal means we are all going to get used to this kind of working, less travel, more video conferences. If you're in the corporate world, there will be less of entertainment. There'll be less of congregations, events. As you've noticed, most of the big sporting events have been postponed beyond 2020, and that says a lot. So the prediction for 2021 is is that it is going to be a severely impacted financial situation. If we go by the current IMF estimates from 4.5 or 5, they've brought it down to 1.9%, assuming that Q3 everything resumes in the normal course. And so if we go by that assumption, and I would like to follow that assumption, saying that everything happens as planned, lockdown is lifted, there is a slow resumption of economic activity, and then we get full steam by the last quarter of this calendar year. And so basically we are saying of the 2021, it will be the second half of the year, which is October to March, which could see a semblance of a normal economic activity.
So I'm going to pick up on that last point that you've mentioned, Sridhar. Thank you for that. Now, I think I take the liberty of actually speaking on behalf of the cohort of attendees, saying that I think from the initial sort of panic state that one was in, I think we've also had time to adjust and reorient our minds to the fact that this is an uncertain year. And therefore, we get talking now into, okay, what are the measures? What is this financial year looking like for us? Many of us have had our board meetings, or we are going into presenting to the board, right? Program shrinkage be one side. In the event of this uncertainty, what are the kind of financial shocks that you anticipate small and medium-sized organizations to be faced with?
So to start with, I think the inflow of funds is what one needs to really look out for. If we are on a guaranteed program funding, how do we secure that going forward? If we are on more on donations and less on other grants or so on and so forth, how do we secure that? So the first shock is the funding shock, and how do we react to that, and how do we secure that going forward will be the first thing.
From an organization, from an enterprise perspective, okay, one is of course the receipt side of things, which is what you spoke about, that we try and secure the funding. For those of us who work on fee-based activities, maybe we have to stretch whatever capital is there with us today.
Yeah.
Now, I